Ladies and gentlemen, dear guests, welcome in the tourism section of the Bled Strategic Forum. It already has some tradition, this tourism part of BSF, and it's known to be, let's say, the sunny part, the sunny side of the Bled Strategic Forum, because we definitely have the best view of the BSF. We definitely have the best food when it comes to offers we give you at the Bled Strategic Forum. You will both witness it today. We obstructed a little bit the nice view in order to give you the possibility to concentrate on the things we will talk about, because we also have very important content we will discuss also today, because tourism is actually the essence of international relations. It brings people together. It enables cooperation, it enables collaboration, it enables people knowing each other, and this may be actually the key of solving also some of the biggest problems in this world. We're very honored that you're here today. What we would like to give you also the floor when it comes to the discussion of the panel. We have beautiful experts, very, very important people in the panel, but we would like to give you also the possibility to share your views with them. We're also very happy how Slovenian tourism has evolved in recent years. So we would also like to hear your opinion on how Slovenia could actually be one of the champions of the new challenges in tourism as such. We are very happy that you will be now greeted by the host. That's the Director General of the Slovenian Tourist Organization, Mrs. Maja Pak. Please.
Dear Minister, Zdravko Počivalšek, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests. Warm welcome to Slovenia, the 5-star experience destination. We are delighted to have you here to participate and share in the 4th tourism panel hosted by the Ministry of Economic Development and Technology and the Slovenian Tourist Board. Thank you for being with us. The world is changing, and it is changing fast. Some changes we like more, while others create uncertainty. However, something is certain. Collaborative economy, at the beginning, just a passion group of hitchhikers and backpackers, has grown into a multi-billion-dollar industry, and it will continue to grow. And it will continue to cause serious implications for hotels, rails, airlines, tour guides, and destinations. Home-sharing platforms with Airbnb, being the leader in this segment, have changed how we travel. They have redefined how we look at the space around us and how we view strangers. And in the last year, it also challenges tourism industry with an additional service, the new experiences feature. Now it's also entering the luxury segment. Their vision for the next decade is to have hundreds of millions of people every year booking end-to-end experiences, the whole travel, where the accommodation will be just a minority. It's hard to look at any phenomena with that kind of growth without trying to understand just why it became so successful and caused so wide implications. One of the reasons was economic. It offered people to make money of their homes, and at least at the very beginning, an affordable way of traveling. But this has over the years developed into a deeper mission: traveling, staying, and experiencing a place like local. Secondly, it addressed the growing demographic of millennials that had before not been addressed properly by big hotel companies. But the real reason was that it offered experience that was special and different. And this is why it's today used by millennials, baby boomers, seniors, and celebrities. This whole growth has not come without challenges. We talk about legislation issues, effects on the housing policies in cities, safety, and also about disrupting the peace of local residents in areas which were before that not populated by tourists. This new reality has either caught one's imagination or shaken one's business model. And as Charles Darwin put it, it's not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent, but the one most responsive to change. So the challenge is how we live with it and profit from it, under the condition that the rules of the game are clear and the same for everybody. The mission of Slovenia as a tourist destination is about offering unique, local, and authentic five-star experiences. It's also about personal benefits and enriching one's horizons in destination which is interesting and attractive to visit, kind and pleasant to live in, and last but not least, well-organized and efficiently regulated to work in. Let me conclude by saying, new reality is here, and it's most likely only the beginning of the story. Dear participants, distinguished guests and speakers, let's prepare ourselves to be challenged, excited, and inspired at the tourism panel. Thank you and enjoy the day.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Pak. Just to avoid confusion, Mrs. Pak spoke about Slovenia as a five-star destination. As you may know, the coat of arms of Slovenia has only 3 stars. And that's why, because it was implemented in 1991. Before we had a period where Slovenia had only 1 star in the flag, then we upgraded to 3, now we are the 5-star destination, so we're moving gradually upwards. But if you perhaps imagine the coat of arms of Slovenia, it has the mountain, the 3 peaks, that's the symbol of Slovenia. Mount Triglav, that means 3-headed mountain. Then we have the 3 stars. It's not about hotels, it's about the Counts of Celje, which is actually the real version of the Game of Thrones. Because one lady of the Counts of Celje was a Polish empress. One lady was empress of Germany, Croatia, Hungary, and all sorts of lands in between, because they were quite good in marrying. So that the 3 stars are about. And then we have also the rivers of Slovenia in the coat of arms. And as you may know, Slovenia, and that happened in between the last and this year's Bled Strategic Forum, is the first country in Europe which actually implemented the right to fresh water in the constitution. So we're leading also in that particular manner. Our guest of honor today is the Minister for Economic Development and Technology, Mr. Zdravko Počivalšek, a former tourism manager who is our next speaker. Please, Mr. Minister.
Honorable speakers and panelists, dear guests and participants of the 4th tourism panel in the frame of 12th Bled Strategic Forum. Welcome to Slovenia, green, active and healthy tourist destination. It's my great pleasure to welcome you in beautiful Bled. Today we will discuss the new realities in tourism and the tourism panel titled The Collaborative Economy, Sharing, Cooperation, or Simply Business. In 2016, Slovenia welcomed 4.3 million visitors who spent 11 million nights in Slovenia, 11% increase in foreign overnights, and generated 2.3 billion international tourism revenue. The results achieved in the first half of the year 2017 are very optimistic, and we expect to have a record-breaking year. Also globally, the tourism perspectives are very positive. The message of the World Tourism Organization is clear. The numbers of international tourism are going to grow in the next decade with about the average rates compared to other industries. But this growth is bringing new challenges. The cities and their residents all over Europe and globally are actively thinking about the impact that tourism has on their cities. We seem to be unprepared for this, but at the end of the day, it is all about management on national and on destination level. Slovenia has just recently finished the process of preparing a new strategy of sustainable growth of Slovenian tourism. The strategy addresses the main challenges and sets clear priorities. There is work to be done on the infrastructure and product side, and it's all about increasing the added value. But it is also about spreading the visitors geographically and especially seasonally 365 days a year. And it's about being focused, innovative, and embracing today's new realities. Today, we can talk about the biggest salesman without stores, the biggest taxi company without cars, the biggest accommodation supplier without bed capacities, the biggest media house without its own production, and so on. Home sharing platforms such as Airbnb, of course, did not happen unexpectedly. They became successful, firstly, by following the trends of disruption in the hospitality business, and secondly, by understanding changes in consumer behavior. Let me just mention 3 disruptions in the accommodation sector that can help us understand the challenges of today's collaborative economy. The first disruption was mainstream hotels in 1950s. Starting with Holiday Inn, they were about travelers wanting a standardized and easily accessible experience. Then in the 1970s came the timeshares. It was about people wanting to buy a second home, but they could not afford it. The large hotel chains first resisted this timeshare idea, but then they started offering timeshare properties. And the next evolution was boutique hotel companies, which focused on design and on offering a unique experience for travelers who wanted choice and local experience. And again, the big hotel companies followed and entered into this new niche. It was success of boutique hotels together with the launch of online marketplaces that created the market for platforms such as Airbnb. And just recently, when it became big, it started to challenge the traditional hotel companies. So this is another disruptive innovation, but the numbers show that traditional hotels are still doing well, and the numbers of the hotel nights are growing. We all agree collaborative economy has very much affected international tourism and hospitality industry. Different countries act differently in these circumstances, and in every country, even every city, the rules are different, but the challenges are very much the same. How to confront this new phenomena? How to accept it? Who is responsible for consumer protection and taxes? How to regulate it? We, Slovenia, would like to have a reputation for being a hospitable country with higher standards of sustainable practices, a country that embraces innovation and also the collaborative economy, but in a responsible and in a win-win way. Let me sum it this way. The collaborative economy started as a way to share a home, but it has now turned into a big business. And when talking about business, we talk about regulations and business rules. Our distinguished guest will discuss and share with us today their practices and opinions about the collaborative economy. distinguished guests, dear speakers, experts, honorable participants. I wish you a pleasant stay in Slovenia, in Bled. We hope you will enjoy our company and hospitality, and thank you. Be successful.
Thank you very much, Mr. Počivalšek. In about 40 minutes, we'll start with the round table. That means a panel discussion with our distinguished guests, Mr. Christian de Barin, CEO of Hotreg, the umbrella association of hotels, restaurants and cafes in Europe, Mr. Carlos Villaró-Lassen, Secretary General of the European Holiday Home Association, Mrs. Daniela Wagner, Director for Europe, Middle East and Africa at Pacific Asia Travel Association, Mr. Clemens Himpele, Head of Vienna's Municipal Department for Economic Affairs, Labor and Statistics, Dr. Janja Hojnik from the University of Maribor, currently the Jean Monnet Chair on EU law aspects of smart and sharing economy, and last but not least, with Mrs. Eva Strauss-Podlogar, State Secretary at the Slovenian Ministry of Economic Development and Technology. But we have one keynote speaker today, and this is Mr. Manolis Psaros from Greece, Managing Director of Toposophy, an integrated destination marketing agency. Mr. Psaros is a well-known, internationally renowned expert on tourism destination management and marketing consultancy. He's also former tourism development director of one of the most fantastic destinations in the world when it comes to tourism, the city of Athens. And on behalf of the Slovenians, I must apologize for the Slovenian basketball team beating Greece 2 days ago at the European Championships in basketball. So please accept my apologies, and the floor is yours.
Well, it doesn't happen often, so we'll let you enjoy that once every 5 years. So
thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the invitation and for the excellent hospitality so far. So it's a privilege, an honor, and a great pleasure to be here. It's probably, I'm one of the few Greeks that have been to Slovenia many times in the past. We've worked before with the Slovenian Tourism Board, and I must say that every single time it feels like unique. So I feel and love Slovenia, just like the marketing tagline says. So I must say that both the Minister and the Director General have successfully shared a lot about what sharing economy is and what are the key challenges that we'll be discussing today. So in the next 40 minutes, I'll be trying to giving you a good snapshot and an insightful view of what sharing economy is, which are the key drivers and challenges behind the phenomenon. We'll talk a lot about the latest market developments and the regulatory updates in many places around the world, but mainly focusing in Europe. And we will end up this session with 7 key takeaways for the tourism sector, hoping to sparkle the debate for our panelists later on the session. So to understand and define what sharing economy is and how this affects the tourism sector and the tourism ecosystem, we first need to understand and define how sharing economy originally emerged. So you see, the global economy is in a huge transition, and one that we have never seen before, forcing lots of countries and cities to reconsider their economic models and the interactions within the market. It is also evident to say that the current economic models, the way it's working now, are not working properly for many country economies in the world, not just Greece, where I am coming from. It is indicative to say that from 2008 until now, all major Western economies has fallen into recession at least once, while all emerging markets have seen their growth rates slowing down at the very same period. At the very same time, we've seen that the average wage level in pretty much all Western world remains stagnant without increasing, and forcing people to seek for alternative incomes, and whereas peer-to-peer platforms and sharing economy models have been very supporting too. In addition to that, we are now experiencing a major demographic shift. Since 2007, and for the very first time in the human history, the vast majority of the human population lives in cities, while in 2050, 2/3 of it will be in cities, stressing the infrastructures and forcing us to reconsider lots of things that we'll be doing now. When it comes to tourism in specific, although the global tourism growth for the last decade were up to approximately 15%, the city tourism growth for the very same period has been raised up to 40%, creating lots of issues and challenges that we are experiencing. So having all these major growth and the challenges that comes with it, we're now being forced to move from a linear economic model where we used to produce, use, and throw pretty much everything to the garbage, to a circular economic model where we use and recycle everything, even if this is our time and our own resources. So you might have heard this phenomenon with many different terms: collaborative economy, peer-to-peer economy, collaborative consumption, open economy, on-demand economy, gig economy. There are tens of terms defining pretty much the same phenomenon. The most popular one is sharing economy, and if I had to choose one definition, I would go for Rachel Botsman's one, which defines sharing economy as an economic model based on underutilized assets from spaces, skills, staff, for monetary or non-monetary benefits. But to be honest, what we define on sharing economy, pretty much 95% of what we define as sharing economy includes some kind of financial transaction, which makes it commercial. So it's not really sharing with the actual meaning of the word, but the word itself is just a word. What really matters is to focus on the phenomenon itself and how this affects us. Sharing is not new. It used to be here for hundreds, even thousands of years. All economic systems and even the nomadic markets used to have an exchange of assets in order to work properly. What has really changed is the digital disruption that's already happening now. The service of now and the evolution of the mobile platforms, which makes very easy for every one of us to share time assets through P2P services. And there is a growing consumer demand behind of it. 50% on a latest study that has been done by European Flash Barometer, we see that 50% of the population is well aware of the P2P platforms. I must say that this percentage in the United States goes up to 80%. So this is where we're gradually going, and we expect to get in the next couple of years in Europe as well. We see that there are different levels of growth depending on countries. Specifically in Slovenia, European Union projects that collaborative economy in terms of volume of transaction is up to 10% of the total economy already, which is big enough for a small country, but relatively smaller than other countries like France, UK, or Germany. But what's most importantly is that consumers themselves believe, 40% of them, that P2P services are more conveniently organized than those offered by the traditional rental sector. However, if you see a lot of studies, and especially one of the most credible ones, which is published from Allianz on a repetitive format in the last 3 years, we see that the only two sectors that P2P services and sharing economy services outperform the traditional rental sector is the authenticity, the offering of more authentic experiences due to the stronger involvement of local communities, but most importantly, the value for money. However, the traditional rental sector has still dominating the field in terms of the quality of products and services, the booking experience itself, and also on the overall experience core. Inevitably, when we talk about sharing economy and tourism, we can't avoid talking about Airbnb. The P2P accommodation giant, which only last year had 80 million guests out of 140 million guests in total for the last 5 years, and $1.7 billion annual turnover. Airbnb has managed to raise $1.5 billion so far in consequent fundraising rounds, and has a market evaluation, an estimated market evaluation of approximately $31 billion at this stage we're talking now. In fact, it was approximately as much as Marriott International, and is second only to Marriott and Priceline.com in terms of market evaluation, although Airbnb does not have a formal IPO yet, but this is something that we expect to happen in the next 2 years, according to the plans. What we also see is that for Airbnb is rising significantly the supply side and the number of listings, expecting to get up to 60 million bookings by 2020 from 10 million, which is today, growing to become the second largest provider, second only to Marriott, and this is only because of the recent acquisition between Marriott and Starwood. But it's not just Airbnb. There is a huge universe of other peer-to-peer platforms. It's not just Airbnb and HomeAway, but many others, and not only in accommodation, but also in many other sectors like tours, experiences, the restaurant, the meal-sharing platforms, and many other fields, which are growing not with the same growth rate that accommodation does, but still with very important growth rates. And as you see, it's not just peer-to-peer accommodation and car sharing. When it comes to the annual growth rates of key sharing economy sectors, it is the crowdfunding and lending platforms and the online staffing platforms, forcing a lot to say that sharing economy will pretty much define the future of work through flexible working models, something which we see that a lot of federal laws in the United States, but also a lot of guidelines and directives from the European Union are also guiding us to. Moreover, we see that peer-to-peer platforms are choosing to go to a more integrated business model, including they're now stepping to offering vertical types of services. Airbnb is not offering just accommodation anymore. Uber is not offering just transfers anymore. Through a massive wave of acquisitions and mergers the last 5 years, Airbnb has recently acquired Resi, which is a restaurant booking platform. They've also launched the Airbnb Trips, pretty much showcasing the company's intention to invest in what we call in-destination economy and the revenues that are being produced by tours, activities, and experiences within the destination. Actually, this is a project that Brian Seskin himself, the CEO of Airbnb, worked personally for the last 2 years, hoping to get it a double-digit number in terms of annual revenue growth, although we see that there is a slow growth of the Trips product itself, but it's very indicative on the intentions of Airbnb and many other platforms. As we already know, visitors and tourists like and prefer sharing economy, and they showed in every single research that has been published in the last 3 years. In a very credible resource like the Focusrite one, we see that the percent of leisure Airbnb renters are very satisfied, and the vast majority of them on the elements of their last Airbnb stays. While another important element to note here is that these next generation rentals have rather added volume to the traditional vacation rental sector and directly compete more with the hotel sector rather than the vacation rentals, which used to be the case in the early stages of sharing economy evolution. We've also seen in other studies and a latest Barclays investor note that all major hospitality organizations like Intercontinental, Marriott, and Hilton have an exposure rate of close to 11% to sharing economy platforms like Airbnb. What does this mean in simple terms? That 11% of their properties are directly competing with nearby Airbnb or other platforms' listings. So it's not about affecting the budget accommodation only. It's not only about affecting the B2B sector. Sharing economy has grown a lot and now affects all stages of what we define as traditional rental sector. Another study by Goldman Sachs showcased that a lot of those consumers that have chosen to stay in Airbnb at least once in the last 12 months, they would prefer to stay again in an Airbnb apartment rather than a hotel one. And that's something that even you from your experience might also recall. So let's make a small test here. How many of you have stayed in an Airbnb or HomeAway or another P2P apartment, okay? It's relatively small percentage, but still good one. How many of you had a negative experience? One. Okay, that's indicative. So the driving force behind this demand is millennials. Millennials is the age group between 18 and 35 years old. It's the age group that we expect to be the 50% of all travelers by the year 2025, and we expect to outnumber baby boomers by 22 million by the year 2030. So we're not really talking about the future generation, we are talking about current generation that we must involve in all our strategies. Millennials is the first generation who prefers, in the post-war era, which prefers to have access instead of ownership of things. It's the first generation that has less houses, less cars, and less credit cards than the previous generation. Mostly because they can't afford to have one, but also in terms of behavioral patterns. But it's not just millennials. We also see that senior groups of citizens and consumers are getting more familiar with the sharing economy platforms, and they start using them more and more. Actually, the maturity of the consumer audience goes together with the maturity of the digital economy itself. So the more people start using the web and its services and having a deep dive knowledge of how it works, the more sharing economy consumers we have. And of course, we have Generation Z, the generation after millennials, which will be expected to be the first generation which will be 100% sharing and won't be easily understand the distinguished lines between traditional and new forms of economies. But don't fool ourselves here. Sharing economy is not only a demand-driven phenomenon. It's also very heavily supported in terms of high policy. There are lots of federal laws in the United States enforcing the free market and the open market regulations. They also same types of guidelines and directives have been published by European Union in the last 2-3 years. But most importantly, we see that major financial corporations like JP Morgan, for example, are investing heavily to Airbnb, and they are becoming part of the fundraising rounds every time this is happening. More specifically, from 2010 until 2016, sharing economy platforms and startups managed to raise up to $12 billion and have an estimated market evaluation of approximately $130 billion. For you to get an indication here, only Airbnb and Uber account for the 100 billion of it, and this is very reflective of how dominant is the position of these two companies for the whole sector. They actually define the sector. Although Uber has publicly claimed that they do not consider themselves as part of the sharing economy, they consider what they do business as usual, and they will compete aggressively in all aspects of their business, something that they do with not such a good results for them. In addition to that, we see that European Commission has already committed a fund of 24 billion euros in the next program period for circular economy funding, of which sharing economy is a big part, while Horizon 2020, which is the financial instrument of European Commission for the financing of small and medium enterprises, has a very clear statement that disruption, a term which until very lately was a term of startups, is now included in the official European documents, and they strongly claim that it will be a priority, and financial support will be given in priority to those companies and new ventures that will disrupt the traditional leather market, that will disrupt the current services with new innovative offerings. So this is an EU guideline in a way. And everything that we discussed so far, in combination with the latest projection by PricewaterhouseCoopers, where they expect sharing economy to have the same annual revenue growth with the traditional rental sector, both equaling $335 billion by the year 2025, makes us consider whether sharing economy is really an alternative model, or we're now talking about a new economy which is gradually integrates many different parts on it. But as in every major economic transition, growth brings challenges, and in many cases it brings collateral damage. Issues and challenges in terms of taxation, zoning regulations, quality of residential life, legal liability and consumer protection are only a few of the issues that have been massively affected by the rapid growth of sharing economy and peer-to-peer services. You see, sharing economy works well and when everything goes well. But what happens when someone breaks your car or when someone breaks your property? Of course, peer-to-peer platforms will claim that there is a very solid insurance scheme behind of it. But those of you who had the unfortunate experience to deal with these insurance schemes, you will get to understand that the compensation behind of it and the legal dispute that you need to go through, it's much more complicated than the one you will have to go through a traditional rentals economy company that complies 100% with the rules. And this is, in a way, what creates what we academically define as the phenomenon of asymmetric information, all the problem with lemons and peaches that some economists within the room might know. You see, as consumers, we tend to buy a product or a service based on the information we have available. So when we book a room in a hotel, although we don't read the contract, we are very certain that certain rules and regulations apply. If we get a food poisoning in a restaurant, same applies there. There are HASP regulations, there are ISO regulations, there are lots of state regulations that these companies need to comply with. And eventually we buy this service knowing that this consumer protection is there and granted. This doesn't actually happen with peer-to-peer services, but 40% of consumers don't actually know that. So you buy this service based on the reviews you get on their site, which is a very good indicator, and as we previously experienced, negative experiences don't happen frequently. But at the end of the day, as a consumer, you're not fully aware of the exact legal protection you get by buying these products and services. And this, in some extent, creates an unlevel playing field. So European Union is trying to keep a rather neutral position in the last years. So from the one side, the EU identifies that sharing economy or collaborative economy, which is the official term, creates new opportunities. It brings more choices to consumers. It lowers the prices. It also provides more jobs through flexible working systems. But at the same time, the official EU documents recognize that this level of economy and the rapid growth that had the last years has created a lot of tensions to the traditional rental sector. And they make a clear call for both state and local authorities, first, to have proper sharing economy, economic impact assessments on their countries, and then to come up with a flexible, updated regulatory framework that allows both sides, space for both sides. More specifically, the published agenda on collaborative economy from Europe makes a clear call for open market access, asking from the state authorities to have reasonable requirements on business authorizations and licenses, where they make a very strong claim that a differentiation between occasional and professional activity on behalf of the service providers need to exist. And that's a tension point in the discussion between peer-to-peer platforms and the state authorities. Also, besides, European Union makes a clear call in terms of legal liability, asking both sides to work together on issues of consumer protection and employment relationships, also asking certain criteria to be installed in order for a platform to be considered as an employer or a peer-to-peer hub service At this point, there is a legal dispute between the Association of Taxi Drivers of Spain and Uber, which haven't got a lot of attention in the public media, but it could be proved to be very important for the future of the peer-to-peer services. In fact, if the taxi associations won this dispute, then peer-to-peer platforms like Uber will be considered as employers, which means that they will have to employ all these drivers and comply with all the employers' regulations. If Uber wants this side, then will remain as a peer-to-peer platform, claiming that they're only a hub of services and not service providers themselves, allowing the market to work exactly as it is now, with all these tensions within. So that's a big legal dispute that we expect to see the conclusion. Of course, the European Union makes a clear call for new taxi rules, but mainly asking from the state authorities to simplify the existing rules, so to have less and better regulations instead of more and not applicable ones, like it is now. But it's not only the tourism sector that has been affected, and it's not really the legal liability issues which raises the most concerns. I would say that the biggest challenge that is now forcing most of the state authorities to take action is overcrowding, it's the residential quality of life, and is the fact that now it is proven that tourist activity coming from peer-to-peer services in residential areas now raises the real estate prices and creates issues of affordable houses, not only in first-tier destinations, like the popular megacities, but also in second-tier destinations. It's indicative to say that Athens this year, which is a second-tier destination with less than 5 million tourists, is facing big issues in terms of real estate and affordable housing matters. So this year we experienced what the industry defined as the summer of over-tourism, with many anti-tourist groups taking place in Barcelona, supported also by political groups, and with lots of residents supporting this reaction. So the rapid growth and the fact that the regulators cannot keep up with the pace of this growth is now creating lots of tensions that need to be resolved. So how the cities are reacting to all these tensions? We can identify 4 different types of legislative approaches so far. We see mostly cities taking regulative action rather than states, because the legal authority in most Western countries allows cities to develop and deliver these laws. So these 4 legislation approaches are there is a very small percentage, supported by cities like Amsterdam, Seoul, or Portland, where there is a very customized approach on sharing economy, trying to make sure that the regulations that will apply are a perfect match with the size and the type of the tourism activity. We see a heavy-handed approach, mostly by cities like Berlin or New York, where complete bans of short-term rentals apply, or very heavy fines, like in Barcelona and Catalonia region. We see a very big percentage of regulated authorities letting the market to self-regulate itself, and this is mostly the approach of Scandinavian, but also of the Australian market. But the vast majority of cities and regulative authorities have a wait-and-see approach. They're trying to see, they even are not able to react, or they're trying to see how the leading cities will deal with this phenomenon before start taking action into that. So let's make a small tour. Amsterdam, one of these cities who were very friendly, had a very friendly position on sharing economy in the early stages of it, has decided that there is a tax avoidance problem with many people not complying with the law, and also they have faced some overcrowding issues this summer with many anti-tourism protests. So they have changed the law and now placed a 60-day limiter for renting your property. On a similar course, London, which was initially very positive on sharing economy, and the government itself claimed that they want to become the sharing economic capital of the world, they are now reconsidering their options, and they placed a similar to Amsterdam cap of 90 days, while the new elected mayor himself claimed that although he remains friendly to sharing economy services, his political priority is affordable housing for Londoners, and he is planning to get certain action to make it happen. Same thing in Paris, lots of legal disputes between hoteliers, the local city authorities, and peer-to-peer platforms, which has finally resulted into a partnership between Airbnb and local authorities to start registering the properties. It's not completely successful so far, but it's one of the first paradigms we have of successful cooperation between peer-to-peer properties and platforms. They've also launched online maps where they monitor the registration activity throughout the city. Barcelona has a very heavy-handed approach by giving fines to Airbnb and HomeAway, and also the Catalan regional government has applied fines from their side. Berlin went one step further and applied a complete ban to all short-term rentals last year, although the decision was being withdrawn by the local court and has been limited only to primary residences. San Francisco, the home of Airbnb, where everything started, and one of the cities who originally asked from Airbnb to be part of the Urban Planning Authority, is now having a legal dispute with them. They've actually forced Airbnb to pay $40 million as a compensation for the bed tax avoidance for the last 4 years. And they're also now working together to find illegal listings. Although from 10,200 listings, Airbnb says it has in San Francisco, we see that approximately only 2,000 are now registered. And this is a very representative, very reflective number of how difficult this situation is. When you see cities like San Francisco, New York, Portland, and when you see people in US where the tax consciousness is very high compared to Europe, facing these problems to comply with the law, you understand how complicated it is and how difficult it is for other less mature countries and regulatory systems to adopt a proper approach. In Reykjavik, where tourism was not a popular economic activity in the past, now we have massive waves of tourism coming in, a lot of them staying in Airbnb apartments, and recently the government asked for an economic impact assessment due to overcrowding issues and high real estate prices, not letting the local people to find the property in affordable fees. Copenhagen, also a city which was initially very open to sharing economy, is now considering similar to Amsterdam, a limiter of close to 60 days for renting your properties. So are P2P platforms and their user paying their fair share? Sure, officially, yes. Airbnb has recently launched a roadmap on working with governments. HomeAway has also launched similar responsible home sharing documents, and the formal policy has been announced for supporting responsible home sharing a year ago by the SAO. Airbnb went one step further. They claim that they want to have 700 tax agreements for collecting and remitting the taxes back to the city council, with 700 cities until the end of 2017. And they have already signed 200 agreements so far. So if you are representing a city or a national authority, this is the right time to get in contact with Airbnb officials and try to reach a tax agreement with them. They've also launched the One Host, One Home responsible home sharing program, trying to educate the hosts and to reduce the phenomenon of multi-properties, which is very evident, although we see that only a limited number of illegal listings have been spotted and taken out of their platform. But most importantly, we see that although there is a good willing and in policy terms, the platform itself itself and the way it performs and works allows enough space both for multi-property owners to run and work throughout the platform. So how the tourism sector reacts into everything that we've seen so far. In the early times, we were a bit like that. We didn't even know what sharing economy was and how it worked. I still remember 3 years ago, the vice president of Hyatt claiming that she wasn't aware of the phenomenon, and she wasn't even sure what Airbnb actually does. And a bit later, we pretty much understood and started to realize the effects of sharing economy, but we decided not to do a lot about that, hoping that this will leave. This is not going to stay. Now that we know that it stays, tourism sector is getting very aggressive and prepares to fight back. There are strong lobbying efforts, both in European Union, but also in many national authorities. So the traditional tourism sector requests for a level playing field. HOTREC, which Mr. Christian de Barin is representing today, has a very strong lobbying activity within European Union. HOTREC is also participating in European Union's think tank on collaborative economy, having a very strong, close connection with the commissioner herself and her advisors, trying to bring a better regulated environment for all European countries. The same thing is happening in the United States, where the equivalent of HOTREC, the American Hotel and Lodging Association, has a much more aggressive position, with a lot of legal disputes with Airbnb in many different United States. And they also have the Serve Better Alliance, where they're asking from people to inform them for illegal listings and illegal hotels activity in order to persecute it by the law. But what if we can disrupt the disruptors? What the big players in the global hospitality industry are doing? Accor Hotels, until very recently the biggest accommodation group in the world, and its CEO has claimed that it's foolish and irresponsible to fight against the sharing economy. In fact, fighting against sharing economy is like fighting against the internet and the digital evolution itself. But it wasn't just a bold statement. This is the formal policy by Accor. Accor, in the last 2 years, have acquired a number of sharing economy providers and platforms. They have acquired One Fine Stay. One Fine Stay, for those of you who don't know, is a very similar platform to Airbnb, but only for very luxury apartments. Expedia has acquired last year HomeAway, which is Airbnb's biggest competitor, and in fact is much bigger than Airbnb in non-city destinations, in non-urban destinations. While TripAdvisor has a silent but long-term strategy since 2011, acquiring lots of vacation rental platforms and peer-to-peer services like HouseTrip and Flipkey. So we see that the traditional or the early adopters of the digital services players are playing with it. At the same time, Hilton, but also Starwood, have announced a partnership with Uber for transferring their VIP guests. Hyatt has also announced that they plan to invest in sharing economy with the Oasis Collection apartments, which is very similar to One Fine Stay luxury apartments. Marriott, back in 2013, has done something really innovative. Having seen that they're losing market share by hotel organizations, by peer-to-peer services, and Airbnb in specific, they've decided to work together with Liquid Space. Liquid Space is a geolocation mobile application that allows you to find the closest and cheapest meeting space to you. So what they did was to upload more than 600 properties, meeting spaces, in 6 different states throughout this platform. So in less than 3 months' time, they've seen an increase of 25% in their food and beverage revenues by using a peer-to-peer service. So they were losing money from Airbnb in their core product, which was the accommodation, but at the same time, they're gaining money by sharing their meeting spaces by also using a peer-to-peer platform. So you see, this is a very typical example of integration, of how both sides could work between these two worlds. Choice hotels have launched their own vacation rental sectors, while Best Western hotels claim that for them Airbnb is just another OTA, and if Airbnb will officially launch their platform for hotels, they will be the first to join them. Although there are a lot of hotels who are already uploading their properties on Airbnb unofficially. So, 7 key takeaways to get with us. First of all, we need to get the full picture. We need to have proper KPIs and metrics, understanding the exact economic impact of sharing economy services into our destinations. We need to understand how this affects our local GDP, how many peer-to-peer platforms are active in our destinations, how many employers they have, how much this affects the traditional rental sector. And after having this data in place, and this is a very clear call from the European Union first, that before applying any regulatory update, you need to have a proper economic impact assessment in place first. Then you come up with a regulatory framework which allows both space for innovation and new forms of economic models, but at the same time makes clear that the level playing field for the traditional rental sector also exists. It's also important to see, due to all these over-tourism and overcrowding issues, that putting the local people first and investing in sustainability is, at this stage, priority number 1. Extensive consultation with residents groups to jointly decide how much and what type of tourism we want is a necessary prerequisite all state and legal authorities need to take. Copenhagen is a very successful example, where they've recently launched their new strategy, where they claim that the end of tourism as we know it, that the king is dead, and the way tourism used to work until now is not evident anymore. And for them, the number 1 priority from now on would be not the visitor growth itself, but the value of visitors and the guarantee that of the residential quality of life. Building partnerships between state authorities and peer-to-peer platforms, between local tourism stakeholders and resident groups, between resident groups and government authorities. Airbnb and Lisbon has launched a tax remittance agreement months ago, much before Airbnb went out publicly and launched the 700 Cities initiative. Sweden, on the other side of things, have worked together with Airbnb to promote all its rural tourism supply and rural properties. And you always need to remember that there is no one-size-fits-all approach. What works well for a destination like Barcelona might not be appropriate for a destination like Tel Aviv or a destination with less visitor flows. For example, it might make sense for Barcelona to place some restrictions because of all these overcrowding and affordable housing issues, but at the same time, we have the example of Rio de Janeiro, where they work together with Airbnb for both a World Cup and the Olympics in order to supply discounted accommodation to all these visitors coming in. So instead of building new hotels and infrastructure that would not be utilized after these events, they work together with a peer-to-peer service to achieve this, to manage this demand. Unfortunately, we didn't do that in Greece 10 years ago. So yes, we still like to enjoy our Olympic properties without having people to visit them. So disrupting the disruptors by inviting in innovation and new elements, it's important here to accept that sharing economy originally evolved because of the flexible legal environment, but at the same time, it entailed a lot of product development, innovation, a new and efficient marketing approach that traditional hospitality sector has lost through many decades of standardization. So there are some good key lessons to take from them, and that's important for the tourism sector to remember. And last but not least, we need to remember this statistic by PricewaterhouseCoopers that in a few years' time, this debate won't be here. These two economic models would be formally integrated to each other, and it would be very hard to see distinguished lines. And closing with the remarks of the Director General, it's pure application of Darwin's theory, and it's definitely the most adaptive ones to survive here. So thank you very much for your time and your attention. I'll be happy to accept questions afterwards, and hopefully we'll have a nice debate on this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Psaros. Great lecture for us. You'll be rewarded with the next lunch in 1 hour time, as all of us. And of course, you'll be here also to answer direct questions. Now we have arrived to the time point of our panel discussion, and I'm really happy to announce the panelists. First one, we're going in the order of seating. Mr. Christian de Barin, CEO of HOTREC, the umbrella association of hotels, restaurants and cafes in Europe. Then we have conveniently placed next by Mr. Carlos Villaró Lassen from Denmark. He's half Catalan, so really interesting combination, Danish-Catalan. Secretary General of the European Holiday Home Association, giving voice to the short-term rental industry, including Airbnb. Then, of course, we have our State Secretary, Eva Strauss-Podlogar, a local from Bled, State Secretary at the Ministry of Economy, Development and Technology. Then we're really happy to announce Mrs. Daniela Wagner, Director for Europe, Middle East and Africa at PATA. She's a British and German citizen, as far as, if this is not fake news now. Then we have from Germany and Austria, Mr. Clemens Himpele, who is the head of Vienna's Municipal Department 23. Well, you know Vienna, old imperial city. Department 23 is responsible for economic affairs, labor and statistics. And of course, we have from Slovenia, Dr. Janja Hojnik, Professor of Law at the University of Maribor. So welcome again. Before we start with questions from the audience, we will have a round of two regarding the comments of what we heard. So Mr. de Barin, Mr. Psaros said that your organization is very active in Brussels, that you are actually ready to fight, and you fight, but on the other hand, you are also willing to cooperate, to perform a dialogue, perhaps also here at Bled. So what is your current position, and especially what is your strategy in having a future for your industry? I said traditional in the beginning, but you decline this this notion. It's not traditional, it's one industry. So how do you see the cooperation with, let's say, the other side of the same side?
First of all, thank you very much to the government of Slovenia for its invitation, its kind invitation to this forum, and also for the takeaway of yesterday's panels. And I took specifically two words, dialogue and cooperation, which I think are essential to meet this new reality. Of course, this new reality also concerns tourism, which has been very well explained by our colleague Manuel Psaros, has been extremely disruptive. But I think over the past 100 years, the tourism sector has evolved, and in particular our sector, which is called the traditional accommodation sector, although it has always evolved and brought new opportunities in. What we consider this phenomenon and how we see it should be handled, first of all, we welcome the so-called collaborative economy that UNWTO call platform for tourism services, because we consider that this is business and that is not exactly sharing. We consider that this is, of course, an additional and new opportunity for tourism destinations, and we have to benefit from this growth from tourist arrivals, which grows for the past 5 years at a pace of 4%. So it's a fantastic opportunity for all stakeholders alike, and in particular cities, of course, regions, and member states to get more international receipts on. However, all the challenge lies in the competition. And we see, for example, that international receipts in Europe grow at a lower level than the rest of the world. So we need to keep competitive, and we consider, since I represent the hotel, restaurants, cafes and similar establishments in Europe, it is about 1.8 million enterprises. It's about 10 million jobs, and its contribution to Treasury of 126 billion euro. Until now, we consider that an impact assessment has to be done, of course at national level, at regional level, to see how the platform tourism services bring to society an equivalent benefit in terms of jobs, in terms of new companies to be built, because this is all the challenge and I think the hope that we can have for the future in terms of new jobs being created and in terms of new companies to be created. Two examples. We believe, and maybe I will come to what we consider are the 5 pillars to build a fair, responsible and sustainable sharing economy. What we need to do first is to be able to evaluate the number of properties which are concerned by the sharing economy, by the platforms, by the service providers. Right now, we have in Europe Eurostat, which registers 13 million beds for the traditional hotel sector. Until now, concerning the so-called collaborative economy, it is 7 million. While my colleague, esteemed colleague from the European Holiday Home Association, speaks 1 year ago of 20 million. So we see the complexity and the need for clarification, more transparency, and we know this is valid for all platforms alike, like the distribution platforms on which we are working very hardly in Brussels within the review of the midterm review of digital single market. So this is number one. When we will be able to have clear statistics, which means that one of the first pillar, and we have been working for 2.5 years with Toposophy on this to try to understand this phenomenon because it's extremely complex, is a registration of activity. When you open a new cafe, when you open a hostel, a youth hostels, definitely you register your activity, and that is very banal. But then, it's the first link to clarify, to make your activity known to the public. What we see for the moment, when, for example, you take, I don't want to be too long, but the example of France, you could hear, you could read that the tax paid by Airbnb last year in France was less than 100,000 euros, which is absolutely unbelievable when you consider the millions of nights. Maybe Carlos can also help me on that because I don't know the number, but for sure, well, I'm sure. But we see that there is, I would say, a challenge here because, of course, everyone should be equal in front of tax. And, as say Manolis, there are also all the aspects of consumer protection. We cannot ask, I would say, a home renter to comply with the same number of regulations of an hotel. This would not be proportionate. But can you consider that an hotel, for example, a 3-star hotel has to comply with 230 regulations, example in Spain for a 3-star hotel, and more or less 10 without, and we know that's the problem for all member states, any enforcement. So consumer protection, if we want to keep the European model, but of course taking all the benefits of this new economy, we have to be able also to be proportionate, but to be very clear on how we approach this new economy and how it should be, I would say, maybe the word regulated is not, but how it should be approached to benefit all society alike. So to conclude, number one, we consider that yes, a simple registration of activity online and even free of charge is essential. It's the recognition of the activity on an official way. Number two, we consider that the most important challenge, is to differentiate professionals from peers. And we see that the French partnership with Airbnb it's the first time that on the platform in France, you will be able to tick professional and peer, which of course definitely will clarify and make more transparent, I would say, your responsibility and the liability that you have towards the people you are renting. Number three, of course, taxation. If you have a registration, whatever it is, taxation will be more natural. And we won't have to ask to the colleagues from Airbnb for listings, because that's the problem right now in San Francisco. Then they go to court, give me your listing back. And everyone, of course, give the listing. And then we see that there are hundreds of thousands of illegal hotels. And number four, health, safety, and security. We're not going to insist on security. We know all the challenge that we have. We have Schengen right now. There is no certainty on this aspect through the platforms. Unfortunately, we may have to come to clarify also on platforms how security must be ensured from who is renting. And the end, in order to make cooperation, and a good cooperation with all stakeholders alike in cities, residents which are concerned, consumers which are concerned, municipality or city council, everyone, it's about the liability of the platform. There can't be such a new economy, and of course the platforms taking a certain responsibility, for example, holding the payment until the prestation or the service is offered without any responsibility and liability. My apologies to be so long.
No, well, it's your job. Mr. Villarreau, last one, could you react on, let's say, the notion of this 5 pillars? How does this fit into your view of the current situation?
Well, I would say that it's nice to be invited, and then the first word was dialogue. Normally, I'm compared with a drug dealer when I come and say I represent short-term rental, the platforms, the property managers, and the house owners that we actually represent. The reality is that, and the good thing about the 5 ideas and the commission, it was a very interesting presentation you had, and also very clear on what the commission is working at, together with the Slovenian government and representatives, is to find regulation that we now acknowledge that we cannot stop this phenomena. 1-2 years ago, it was either should we have it or not, or ignoring it. Today, we accept that it is there to be part of the economy, and we also want it. And one important point to begin with is to explain that this is delivering growth and sustainability and equality. And I heard these 3 words yesterday, and at all the panels, we want more equality, the problems with equality, the problems with sustainability, and the problems with growth. Croatia, 20% of Croatian economy is from tourism. It came from 0 to 20% of the economy in the last 25 years. And the majority of accommodation, the vast majority, is private homes, together with hotels, actually, the receptions, and together with the platforms. If you take Berlin, the tourism in Berlin has reached numbers that they don't like anymore, but they came from no tourism. It was Paris and London and New York, and now Berlin is a huge tourism sector because of the private accommodation. And if you take Bled, we had a discussion, how many units do we have here in Bled? And that will get us back to the figures. And I would say that you would have maybe 500 properties here in Bled. How would you have a rowing competition? I know you have nice hotels, I stay in one, beautiful, but you wouldn't have this rowing competition together with all you people, all us people at this, without using of the existing capacity. And this is not a new phenomena. The new thing is that we organized it.
Some would say rowers are very skinny, you know, so they can accommodate, they could be more easily accommodated.
They can sleep in the boat, maybe. And then the equality thing, the sustainable thing is using existing buildings, because we don't want Bled to become one big building of guests, but if we use the existing residence of private people owning the residence and renting it out when you have a rowing competition. That works very good. And then we talk about housing prices. They are rising. That's a big problem. Hey guys, if I were the mayor of Ljubljana or London, I would be happy that the property value of my buildings were rising. I don't see the logic that suddenly that's a problem. We have to find solutions for people who can't afford it, of course, but raising value of the properties around Bled, I hope that that's the main task for many politicians, and then they can create new homes for other people. And why is the value raising? That's because the value of the property has a bigger impact on everything. And when we talk about economy, it's only 20% of the money spent, we saw the figures in the other presentation, by a tourist that goes to the accommodation. 80% goes to local restaurants, local shops, people self-catering, going to the local supermarket, and actually giving supply to the local economy. So I think we have a city problem somewhere, and you mentioned Berlin, and Berlin actually went too long. Because yes, we've seen a strong lobby, and we had to defend ourselves, and we looked into laws, and from the European Holiday Home Association, we sent in a complaint to the European Commission, and the European Commission welcomed the complaint, and they are looking at it now, against Barcelona, Berlin, Paris, and Brussels, saying that the laws they've imposed in these cities of various types of problems actually goes against EU law. And why is that? That's because actually the laws, and also in Slovenia, and that would be my point on this 5 pillars or whatever, is that you must protect your citizen. EU citizens must be protected by the EU system, and Slovenian citizens must be protected by Slovenians. This is both protecting the people who want to travel, because more than 50% of all short-term rental is actually domestic tourism. Slovenians living in other places in Slovenia. They've done that always, calling my sister saying, oh, do you know somebody in this city? I remember, could I borrow their house for 4 days? And now we just put it into a business model, but actually existed for a long time. You need to protect these people, and you need to protect the house owner. And we actually think that the problem with regulation is the witch hunt that is happening, because it's so easy to jump to the trouble and the problems and the tax thing. And then people get scared. And I will tell you one thing about collecting taxes. You're doing a bad deal, because if you claim a huge, what we see in Italy right now is terrible, where they say, oh, all the taxes should be collected by platforms and the law is not in place. It was a 1-month preparation. And then people are taking off their listings because they get afraid. And what happens then? Then you lose tourists. And the tourist is actually creating a lot more tax than that city tax would create. So you need to build trust. And I think Slovenia is actually doing a good thing, saying, hey, this is very new. We don't know even what to call it. Is it holiday homes? Is it short-term rental? Is it short rental? Is it self-catering? And in Slovenian, what do you call it in Slovenia? What's the name of this phenomenon in Slovenian? You don't even know. Because it's
you bear in mind, Slovenian is a very difficult language. There are only 2 million people in the world able to speak it, so sometimes it's quite complicated. But let's stick to English.
Let's stick to the English one. And even in English, that's just my point. We see this phenomena in all languages. We don't have the actual word. We call ourselves Holiday Home Association, and maybe we should call ourselves Short-Term Rental Association, or just rental, tourism, vacation, holiday homes. There's so many numbers. It's so new. So the approach, wait and see, and create some kind of trust in the citizen that he can do this, then he actually wants to pay taxes. I come from Denmark. In Denmark, we have had this very well-organized thing in 40 years, and it's a huge tax income system. So in the long run, you will get your taxes, but if people don't trust that they actually are allowed, they just peel it off or leave the system.
Okay. Regarding we saw the what Mrs. Psaros also showed us, king is dead. It's easy to say that in Denmark because you have no king, and
Have a queen.
the husband of the queen does not want to be a king. So it's easy.
Oh, that's
to,
complicated. He actually
we'll
wants.
We'll go with the comments later on. I would like please pass the microphone to Mrs. Wagner. You deal a lot in your splendid career with strategies. Well, what do you think about the strategies of both sides of the, let's say, the same coin? How are they going towards, let's say, cooperation, collaboration, and let's say sharing of the benefits, of course, for the benefit of the people?
Okay, well, first of all, good morning, everybody. It's a huge pleasure for me to be here in Slovenia. It's my first visit, and I look forward to enjoying a walk around the lake later on this afternoon. And I pass on greetings from the CEO of PATA, who is Mr. Mario Hardy. He came 2 years in a row. I think he was the keynote speaker last year here. And he has made it very clear that I'm only allowed to come this year, and next year he will be back again. And he would like to have a Slovenian passport so he can become an honorary Slovenian citizen. So I hope that this can be actioned after my visit, and he will be very happy. So let me first of all say a couple of words about PATA, if I may. So you all know PATA is Pacific Asia Travel Association, so it is the leading trade and travel association representing the whole APAC region. So basically all of Asia, South, North and Southeastern Asia, and then right down through Micronesia to the Pacific region. So a very large region of the world with complex cultures and complex growth patterns. One thing actually that Christian mentioned earlier is that Europe is growing in its tourism receipts, but it's not growing as fast as other parts of the world. North America continues to outgrow Europe, and Asia outgrows both Europe and America by up to 5%, although that varies from one part of Asia to another. But it's by far the fastest growing tourism region in the world, both in terms of domestic tourism, as in people moving around Asia from one country to another, which is pushed very much by low-cost carriers, which have boomed in Asia in the last 10 years, and also by the fact that there are many, many people coming to Asia, so inbound to Asia and outbound from Asia. Lots of people, in fact, in Europe are now targeting, and I know this area of Europe in particular is targeting the Asian outbound traveler to come here. So that's just by way of introduction. The sharing economy is growing very quickly in Asia, as it is in the rest of the world. Of course, if you look at destinations like Singapore and Hong Kong, they have always had very large expat communities. So their ideas about ownership and rental are anyway different, because most people in Hong Kong didn't own their own homes. They were sent there for a number of years to work or live there and brought their families with them. So actually, I think conceptually, we're looking at different mental attitudes towards ownership and rental anyway in the Asian community. I was giving a lecture yesterday morning in Bournemouth University in the south of England, and there was a lady there from Adelaide, and she was talking about the fact that China has actually put the sharing economy as one of its top strategic priorities. So it's one of the few countries in Asia that has actually said, right, we're going to implant this into our national government strategy plan from day one. And that, I think, is very interesting. So they've actually gone a step further than most of the other Asian countries at the moment, who are taking more what Manolo would call the wait-and-see attitude. Let's see where we end up. But the example of China is very interesting, because China is going through a massive revolution, cultural revolution, social revolution, and they've got all these people moving from rural areas into the cities, and they see that not only is the sharing economy something which will help them look after their own citizens. So, for example, one of the big initiatives there has been MobiBike, which is sharing of bicycles, which has enabled a startup there called MobiBike to raise $600 million in funding. and buy many, many new bicycles, which are easily accessible to all citizens, whether they're tourists or local residents. You can find the bike with your GPS on your phone. It costs less than 5 cents to rent the bicycle for half an hour. So that's a service that would normally have been provided by the Chinese government to its residents. And in fact, now it's being privately run. It's extremely effective. It will also help to combat the urbanization of China because it allows people to move around the rural areas. So there's lots and lots of important benefits. And whilst that hasn't got anything to do with housing or hotel accommodation and rental, I think one of the points that Manolo made is that the sharing economy in terms of accommodation and private rentals is only one small part of the sharing economy, and that there are many, many other sectors, from, you know, sharing music and news to books and ski equipment, which are going to grow extremely quickly on the back of what the traditional sectors are, which are shared transport and shared accommodation. So Mario's own perspective and Parta's own perspective is, again, actually Parta is broadly supportive of anything that helps tourism to grow. Airbnb have just recently joined Parta. They're one of the new partners, and Parta will be working with Airbnb on producing research and information that is useful to the tourism industry. So Parta is neither for nor against the sharing economy. They see it very much as part of the growth of the tourism industry. And Mario personally is actually very much in favor of it, because he feels that in order to create a sustainable environment in the world, actually, and this is something that you were mentioning, you know, the Sustainable Development Goal number 12 of the United Nations is actually less ownership and more sharing. And that if you look at that, I think we've got to kind of broaden our thinking and think that the people in the generation that is driving the sharing economy, which some of us in this room are of that generation, but most of us are slightly older. But for them, it's actually something that they fundamentally want and believe in. They don't care. I have 5 children. Not one of them owns a house or a car. Some of them could afford to own cars. They just don't want to. They don't see the point. They rent one or they take public transport. So the whole mindset is completely different of this new generation. And actually, we should say that's the fundamental starting point of this discussion, is sustainable development and what does the future person want in his life. And then we have to create a framework that can support that. But we can't impose the framework first. We have to say those two things are things that are going to happen anyway, and therefore how are we going to be able to support that process. So coming back to what these two gentlemen are saying, okay, I would say that they're both right. Christian is absolutely right in what he says. He has to maintain the balance between what his members and the country members want. No?
It's not, I would say, well,
okay.
It's not our position. We just want, you know, to find a real sustainability of tourism, which is not the case. And it's not to be about to be there. It's already there. So that's why we need to assess it and to see how we can make it, to make the best benefits of it, and to keep and to rise the receipts vis-à-vis the other regions of the world. Because this is also a competition.
Okay, Slovenia is very small, so you probably heard Mr. De Barra. Yeah, go on.
So, no, and I was going to say, and Carlos is right as well, because actually where he's coming from is that fundamentally not everybody is a tax evader or somebody who is trying to break the law. Short-term rentals, especially in a place like France, started out from the fact that people were underutilizing their properties and they just wanted to share them with other people and make some money to actually support the costs that they had around those houses. So I think, as with everything, we're just in a very fast movement period at the moment, and very quickly, hopefully, that will settle down and things will become logical. One final point is, I was talking with a gentleman from Orlando yesterday, which has 3 pillars to it and is one of the fastest growing cities in America. It has a very large traditional tourism sector based on Disney and all the many, many millions of people who come there every year and stay in hotels and go to Disneyland. But it also has a very fast-growing sharing economy. People go there and rent and go to Orlando as a destination. And then it has a very fast-growing business segment. So KPMG and lots of other companies are now actually going to base their new headquarters there. And what was interesting about that is that Orlando has found a very good way of collecting reasonable tourism taxes from individuals, and those are ploughed directly back into developing the business segment of the city and also the life of the local residents. So in fact, the local residents end up not resenting the 30 million people that are coming every year to Disneyland. So again, it's all about a balancing act, and I think
but
sure.
before we pass the mic to Mr. Himpele, just one question, because the Asian market is growing so fast.
Yeah.
It's a vast population, and you mentioned that especially China is trying to somehow get into this sharing economy. Will there be a Chinese Airbnb soon, as sort of Airbnb or Alibnb, which will actually influence the whole global scene more than it does now?
I don't know I know there are lots of discussions around that, and I know that Ali Trip has been looking at that very closely. I don't know what the time frame is on that, but there will definitely be something, I would have thought, in the next 12 to 18 months.
Okay, perhaps they will swallow us all. But
quite possibly, who knows?
Let's go to Mr. Himpele, who comes from Vienna, who used to be also the capital of present Slovenia for a very long time. So we look always to Vienna, which is also, let's say, one of the tourism capitals in the world. You're dealing with the current situation, and you're known for having a quite interesting approach. Could you share with us, because we're speaking about sharing, your experience and of course the handling of the city of Vienna of the present situation?
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. I can do just a few remarks in the beginning. It was very interesting listening to the three opening remarks. I'm very looking forward in which corner you will put Vienna, Mr. Psavos. But there was one person saying people traveling with the platforms because they want to live like a local. And I think this is just marketing speech. If you look at the numbers, the flats are in the exact same districts than the hotels. And if you book via, let's say, Airbnb, you will live like a tourist, which is fine. We like tourists in Vienna, but we should dismantle all this, advertising from the platforms. Because it's totally fine being a tourist in Vienna, but most of the flats rented out are professionals, which is also fine. And some of them even existed long before Airbnb, HomeAway, you name them, was existent, so it's nothing new. To share something is nothing new. We had ski rental in the Alps, I don't know, for decades. We have cooperatives. And I think that's very important because this means that the laws we have in Austria and in Vienna fit it. And there is no gray zone, like always in the debate. It's totally clear what you have to do if you rent out your flat. And there were two things, maybe one is for you and one is for you. It is legal doing it. I mean, if you apply to the rules, of course, but it's legal doing it. There is no, in Vienna, I mean, you can do it if you're not living in a social housing project. Yeah? It is legal. But the second point is, most of these people are not paying the taxes. And that's what we know, because we know who is paying the taxes. It is not that there is a few not paying the taxes. Most of them don't pay the city tax. And that's why the city of Vienna and other cities have to step in. Because it's also clear, I mean, it needs to be a level playing field between the hotellerie, the traditional, somebody say there's no traditional hotellerie, but anyway, yeah?
And they're paying taxes or not?
They do,
No, okay.
they do. And we know them very exactly, and that's the point. We do not have a legislation problem, we have an enforcement problem. We have a problem with the administration. We had 400-something hotels, or we still have 400-something hotels in Vienna, and we have now 8,000 flats, which is 20 times as much. And some of the flats are just rented out a few days in a year. So how to find them? That's the second point. The platforms say they will cooperate. What I see is they do not have a single employee in the countries where we can talk to. Not a single. What they have, they pay a lot of lobbyists. I have a lot of dates with lobbyists in the last 3 years, which is nice to meet them, but this is a problem. And we have one legal question which has to be solved at the European level. I think it's not fair that the huge companies, and that's not a sharing economy problem, have their base in the Netherlands and in Ireland. And it's not because of Dublin and Amsterdam are very beautiful cities. It is just because of tax avoidance. To be very clear, it is just of not paying, and this I think is the European problem. It's not a problem Airbnb have to solve, or home sharing, or whatever, HomeAway, whatever have to solve. This is a problem which has to be solved at the European level, and I would very welcome that Slovenia, Austria, and other countries really try to find a solution for this tax problem. How Vienna dealt with this. We started 3.5 years, 4 years ago, and we ever said we do not want, we welcome innovation. Not paying taxes, not an innovation. Yeah?
So we may...
I mean, this is important because, yeah?
So if we have this problem in Slovenia, not paying taxes, we actually learned it from the Viennese.
Okay, I see.
Okay.
What we said is, you can do it. So we have no restriction like Amsterdam with the 60 days. Just embrace this. How to enforce the 60 days is a huge problem the cities have not solved. But this just embraces. So if you have a flat, if it owns to you, and the whole house owns to you, you can rent it out, it's fine with us. The second point is we said, okay, we need to enforce this level playing field. So we changed our Tourism Protection Promotion Act and said, okay, the platforms have to give us the data. The platform, why? For tax enforcement. This is a totally normal thing, actually. Yeah, I mean, tax officers get the data from, I don't know, from every employee in the world. Yeah? And we said, okay, this is one way. But if you don't want to give us the taxes, there's also the possibility to make an agreement with the city of Vienna. This agreement includes the taxation question. But not only, I think the platforms have to learn to take the responsibility for the economic activities they do. Otherwise, just embraces the disruption of the disruptor will be done by the disruptor. Because look to Barcelona, what happens there. The platforms disrupting their own business model because it's too much. Yeah? It's a real problem. The population will protest against this. And up to now, 90% of the Viennese are happy with the tourism sector, and we want to keep it like this. Yeah? We want the platforms, the hotels, want everything in Vienna, but at a level that it works. So we say, we said to the platforms, give us the data so we can enforce the tax law. And the interesting thing, it came into force because we had to do a notification at the European level. It came into force half a year ago. We had half a year of a break, so the platforms can talk to us and whatever. And just a few days ago, it came into force. We identified 16 platforms which are active in Vienna at the moment. 3 of them, maybe 4, because there's a differentiation between what I know and what was written in the media, but we see, gave us data. 5 are negotiating with us, and the other 8 will have to pay fines now. Yeah, we will send them now a mandate that they have to pay the fines. And what is the aim of this? The aim is, you're very welcome with your new business model. I'm very happy that families stay in flats, for example, and not in a hotel. Or we have to look at the customer side as well. I mean, tourism, that's what cities and sometimes governments often forget. It's about the customer, the way they want to go. But we make it very clear we want to have a share economy which is a fair economy. We do not want a share economy which is not paying taxes and not obeying to the laws. And I think this is a sensitive way dealing with it. And we are one of the cities, because it was very interesting that a lot of cities changed their strategies. When we started, we talked to Amsterdam and to Berlin, because it was the 2 pools at that moment, and we tried to find a middle way. Vienna, up to now, didn't have to change the strategy because we think it works. We have about 8,000 flats rented out by the platforms. That's fine. If it gets much more, then we have to think about another strategy. If it keeps like 8,000, 9,000, it's fine, because we have a housing problem. Vienna grew by 300,000 inhabitants in the last 15 years. But the argument, also applies for hotels, of course, because any hotel can be a flat. Yeah? So it's always a question how many of the space in a city is for business and how many is for living. But this needs to be in a, and this is something every city have to know for its own. So the platforms are welcome. I would ask them to take more responsibility of their business activities they do. I think business is, they always say we're just a platform. And what was mentioned on the European High Court with Uber is very interesting. Because at the moment it looks like Uber will lose. We will see. Yeah? At the moment it looks like. And I think it's the right way because they have to be responsible for what they do. And if they do this, and we are in very good negotiation with a lot of platforms, yeah, really, they came to us and said, okay, let's find a solution. Then Vienna is very happy to have them in the city. But to make it really, really clear, we know it from the numbers, it's not that 10% are not paying the taxes, it's much more. With an information campaign we launched, we did an own web page where all the rules applies. It's really, really simple in Vienna to follow the rules. There's one web page, sharing Wien GV.at. It's in German and in English. And you find every single rule you have to follow. It's quite easy. You have to pay your tax. You have to follow the registration law. And if you have more than 10 beds, then there are special law for, like in every city. It's really, really easy doing it. But then please follow the rules and everybody will be happy. And that's the point we have to single out. And I think we should not, there is one side, like Berlin did, oh, we don't want them. I don't agree. There's the other side, like I hear often, oh, let them come in, whatever they're doing. I also don't agree. Yeah? I think we need really a good way living it, and just saying, because you mentioned Sweden, with the countryside, it's a difference if you have a growing city with a lot of people looking for flats, or if you have a countryside which is underutilized in a way. And to use underutilized places for tourism or whatever is a brilliant thing, and this would not happen without the platforms. But that's not the problem we have in Vienna.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Himpele. You will get the microphone, Mr. Villarreal-Lassen, but please, can you pass it to Ms. Strauss-Podloger? Because, okay, we heard the Viennese example. We very often copy what Vienna does. But when it comes to, let's say, sharing economy as such, especially in tourism, I think Slovenia is right now in a wait-and-see position. So how do you see Slovenia could actually solve this, I would say, not a problem, but challenge?
I can say that it's not necessary to copy Vienna laws because we already have them. So this is maybe a part of our common history. But I would like to continue with where Mr. Psaros ended. So he said, full picture of what is all about. Embraced with cautious. Put local people first and maybe just building dialogue and of course speak with partnerships. So this is what we did in Slovenia. And I must say that at the end of these 2 years of talking and maybe sometimes be criticized that we are too slow, we find out that this is nothing new for us. It's definitely 100 years of tradition, that we are doing what people would expect for government and from the ministry, to give a fair competition to everyone, to give certain security to the guests that they are coming, and of course to encourage also local people to start to do business in tourism. So if I can share with you my personal story, it's a big difference between, as we already said today, between the touristic resorts and the cities and the capital cities that maybe in the last few years become a tourist attraction. So when my father started to build a house in Lake Bled in 70s, it was normal that we had a flat for our family in upper floor, and then in downstairs we had 3 rooms with bedrooms with 2 to 4 beds for tourism. So I spent all my summers giving breakfast to the tourists, talking with them, giving them the local experience with local people. And of course, for me, that's very important. I mean, for us now, having Airbnbs and bed and breakfast, because for me, tourism is something good. It's bringing people all over the world to share with you their experiences, of course, brings money. So it was money for my family. It was, of course, extra money for me because of the tips. I was very friendly.
And
You know, this is what tourism is all about.
and you pay taxes.
And of course, we
okay.
pay taxes. And here we are going into nowadays reality, in new reality, where tourism luckily is expanding, it's growing. So quite a lot of my friends, they decided, because sometimes also in Slovenia, young people go to other places, not very often they stay at home, but sometimes they leave houses. So they decided to start business. And first question was, where can I register? How can I register? Really, because nobody really wants to be in a gray or not criminal. It's too
Or some would be, but
strong
okay.
word. So first they were checking this. How can we register? So as I already mentioned, we have a legislation for about 50 years, I suppose. It's a catering law. In Slovenia, we have it that it's 150 days. It's maximum for the physical person, for Mr. Noak, to start doing business with renting his flats or house, and 15 beds maximum. So it's 150 maximum, but you can also rent it for 1 month, for 2, and you pay taxes and you pay additional costs only for this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 months. So this is already possible, and the next question is how, through which platform I will do the business. Is it Airbnb, is it Booking.com, or the others? Some people like, a lot of people like Airbnb because the provisions are lower, and because of this interaction and reviews, the guests and the host. So it's not a problem. You can definitely start open the business and doing everything right, as Clemens already mentioned. The new kind of problem arose when Ljubljana really became the destination, the tourist destination. But it's, I think, fair to say that it becomes because they invested a lot. Huge budgets that Ljubljana is now also not only capital, but a tourist resort. For the budget, you need taxes. So, I mean, it wouldn't be, if Ljubljana would be Ljubljana from 30 years ago, no need for Airbnb, enough of hotels. But now there are new hotels, and it's definitely good. We have a brand new hotel from this month, and we have Airbnbs. It's just what we expect and want to do is to have a really fair competition, and of course that the people would register, and they can do so. So this is our aim, to communicate a lot with the people. Of course, there are some problems with the multi-flats buildings. These are the problems in Slovenia because most of the flats are personal owned. So you need the agreement of your neighbors that you can do the business. But it's, again, possible to solve this, but the number one thing we also want to have is the list of the hosts in Slovenia. That's why we sent already 2 months ago from the side of our minister a letter to San Francisco headquarters where we asked for this list. We didn't get the answer yet because on the other hand we would like to have more supervision. I mean, not that we will be as very unfriendly to the people they want to open to the tourism, but again, if you're doing the business and not need to discuss after all of us that this is a business, I think it's good to know who is doing this business and who is the guest is invited into the house or flat or private accommodation, and of course to pay what is necessary to pay.
So,
thank you.
We don't wait and see, we see and act. Okay, now we go to Dr. Hojnik. So we have to end this first round with the lawyer and with the lady. So you're dealing with this phenomena, let's say from the legal point of view. What could you add to what we've already heard, especially these legal challenges?
Just before with the debate with opposing views, I remembered of being a law student some 10 years or more ago at the summer school. And Professor Joseph Weiler told us a story of a rabbi who had to solve a dispute between two people. And after listening the first one, he said, yeah, you are right, I agree. And then listening the second one, he said, oh, you're right as well. And then his wife, standing behind said, you foolish husband, how can they both be right when they are saying the opposite? Ne? And then he thought and said, well, you're right, my wife. So this reminds me of this. But of course, also for academics, it's now really an interesting period of time to follow all what is happening. Of course, both at the legislative side, but mostly at the courts. And it is not just the European Court of Justice that is dealing with sharing economy, but many national courts across the globe, in fact. Ne? And I couldn't say that it is just the European Court of Justice that is showing now through the Advocate General's opinions a bit more cautious approach, but many other courts as well. So I guess it's not so unlikely. I expect the European Court to follow what was said in spring by Advocate General, meaning that Uber platform is not just a platform, that this is sort of a mixed economy. Mixed in the sense that through your digital economy, you are a platform, but your activity is worth nothing without this real sector, real world. You're not offering virtual rights, like in a video game, but you're offering real rights. And I guess it's the same for Airbnb. They're just a virtual platform, of course, a digital one, but they are offering real experience. So we are not renting virtual rooms. So what are then the consequences? Because I started following, at the beginning of my career, the gambling sector. Then it was the same story more than like 15 years ago with Bet and Win, saying you can't fight internet. Bet and Win will establish in Malta. They are open to online bets and online poker, and so there was a series of platforms like this. You can't fight them, really. You can impose with your Games Act that they need to register, that they need to get a license. Né? And I would say that gambling is probably even more sensitive than renting rooms. Né? Because member states in European Union have very different attitudes. Some are really negative. This is something that causes, I don't know, prostitution, suicides, families going bankrupt, houses sold, and so on. So some states were really negatively oriented towards this, and there was quite a big crash between the states. And countries like Slovenia that used to enable in Yugoslavia gambling just for foreigners because they were bringing in foreign currency and so on. And so how can you stop them? You will require license. But at the same time, you will say that only Slovenian establishments can get a license for gambling. Né? And then even if you have this law, how can you prevent them from operating anyways? Because Slovenians want to gamble. They want to bet on horses, on football, and so on. Né? So I see many parallels with these fighting internet platforms. Né? And in general, I see Airbnb that we are discussing today just as an element of a broader servitization trend that is linking this sector also with Industry 4.0 that you can hear all around. What will happen with robots in our working environment? What will happen with 3D printed products? Now you can have a 3D printed gun, you know. Actually, a law student invented it. Né? And put it on internet, and in, I think, 2 days or so, he had 100,000 of downloads.
Dr. Hornik, you can also have a 3D printed house or apartment.
Yes,
so that would be, yeah.
Yes, I know. So. But maybe with guns, you know, now it's the most pressing issue, how to stop this, because you can have a plastic gun in your bag and going through the airport. Né? And other issues in the digital, this whole digital economy that will affect legislation. But mostly, I think regulators are trying to use the existing law to the highest level possible. No? And then there are some remaining challenges that need to be discussed, but then really probably on a case-by-case basis, not with a lot of copying, not with easy copying within. We could perhaps in Slovenia copy German company law and put it here, having similar company forms and so on. But then even in Germany, there was a problem with companies when we had internal market. It was in 1999 in famous Centros case when European Court of Justice said that German companies do not need to pay 20,000 euro to establish a company because they can do this in London for £1. And then we had thousands of companies in Germany doing this, but also in the rest of Europe, having limited companies all around. But the court said you can't just generalize the public threat. You can't say everyone that doesn't have 20,000 euro to establish a limited company is a fraudulent person. You have to then prove this on a case-by-case basis. And this is a difficult thing to just arrange case by case. And in this respect, it's very important that Airbnb offers information on who is offering accommodation in each country. And it's good to know that Vienna managed to get this information. And
well, not yet.
I think you said that you got the list of.
We got from 3 platforms, we got information. With 5 we are dealing, and 8 didn't do nothing.
Okay, so they're still waiting.
So
yeah.
half of them did and half didn't.
Well, before we go to your questions, I would like just to give the opportunity to Mr. Villarolassen because he was raising his hand for a very long time.
20 times or so. Thank you very much. I'll do it short. But just to say, imagine that you can't stop this. The tourists will come increasingly to Ljubljana and to Bled and to Slovenia, and they will create growth. And they will use some platforms, and if you try to stop those, they will use other platforms. And people want to share their apartment to gain some money. So if you think it that way, you would see that who's the biggest competitor? And we mention one company all the time. I think it's a little bit unfair. When we talk nice about them, it's okay, but there's many platforms, and they don't have a share they don't have a share that's that huge, this particular company. But the biggest threat to this company could be Facebook or Google. And what will you do then? I put my apartment on Facebook saying, hey, you can rent this. Contact me, I'm Carlos. You know all my family, my friends, my family pictures. I trust this guy. I rent it directly. And then when the city of Vienna calls Facebook and says, oh, we want to know how many nights this guy used, Carlos. Oh, well, we don't know. We don't know what he writes. We try to manage something, but this is an open platform. Or Google. I just put myself on Google saying, you want to live in Copenhagen or in Barcelona. So imagine that you can't stop it. And then, please, change the rhetorics. You have to protect your citizens. And the problem you do in Vienna with the rhetoric you use is you sound as you are in war against your own citizens. Yes, you do sound like that. You might not be, but you sound it. You say, and no one has a representative in my city or in my country in Vienna from these platforms. But remember, this, as the lawyers told us, an actual service because there's an actual person living in Vienna. And this person, you should talk with this person. You should find your local people. The thing is that the platforms organized it, and the development is so extreme. So please, we heard the figures. We are going from, one company went from 100 to 200, and now they have a goal of 700 deals. Vienna called them, Slovenia called them, but all the cities, the rest of the world called all the platforms at the same day saying, hey, guy, this is my time to get my fair share. Remember that you have to protect your citizens, and Slovenia was the first to make a free right for water. You should make a law, free right for rent, and build it from there. And of course you need clean water, you need regulated water. What we want to is be on the right side of law, also in Vienna. We want also to pay taxes and pay fair taxes. So it's not true. And then you witch hunt with the rhetorics, this group, and what you actually create is that it goes below radar instead of inviting them in, as you also want to say.
But we would have to fight. We would have to fight. Yeah, of course, we would have to fight about the definition of clean renting then. Okay, but
just
yes, and then you.
Just a few remarks on this. You said we should contact the owners of the flats. Well, then give us the data. But you don't do this. In half of them don't do this, so we cannot contact them. So what you are doing is you are arguing in a way which is not fair, because the platforms always say this is data protection we can't give you. This is not data protection, it's tax law. Yeah? And you say, just contact the owners. Yeah, of course, then give us the data, we'll do. First thing. Second thing, it's not a witch hunt. I know the numbers of the persons paying the tax, and I know the numbers of flats rented out in Vienna. And I know the difference between this. I know it. Yeah? And it has nothing to do with, and as I mentioned, if you follow the rules, you're very welcome to do your business in Vienna. The problem is that the platforms often, it's the platforms, you're right, it's not Airbnb, it's not an Airbnb law, whatever, it's 16 in Vienna, as I mentioned. The problem is that the platforms often say, it's not our business, we are just bringing together the owner and the renter. That's the, just listen to the platforms, I'm sorry, but that's what they say. And just to come back to the Ljubljana case, there was an article in an Austrian newspaper, I don't know if it's true, but there was written, it's 1,700 flats are rented out in Ljubljana, and 80% are not registered. 80%, it was written in the newspaper, I don't know if it's true.
It's fake news, but
Maybe, yeah?
could be true.
But the number, well, you know, I know the Viennese number, so it wouldn't shock me, yeah? And this is the point, yeah? You can't say, yeah, just contact them, but the data we don't give you. At the platform, you can't find the data. If I send a letter to, somewhere send a letter to San Francisco, I don't get an answer. But that's the way how the platforms often deals with the cities. And that's what I mentioned before. The platforms need to be responsible for the business they are doing. The city is responsible for protecting their people, and it's not just the people owning a flat. I mean, using instead of owning is fine, but someone owns it, yeah? Somebody owns the things, yeah? And we have a lot of people, I mean, look to Barcelona, what happens there. It starts in Amsterdam. And I think this is a serious problem for cities, and you can't solve it by saying, yeah, but we can't change it, the platforms will be there. Yes, they will be there, but it is the aim and it is the task for city administrations and for city politics to bring it in a way that tourism is very well, and that people can live in the city, because Vienna looks like a museum, but it is not a museum, there's people living in.
Thank you very much. I'm really sorry to interfere into a very lively debate, but we would like to be fair and give the floor also to Mr. Debarin, and then we go to your questions.
Thank you very much. No, I would like to say that first, of course, I fully agree with my colleague from Vienna. We saw in Amsterdam how the agreement did not work. When there was an agreement for 90 days or 60 days, then they went to court. That's the same exactly in England when there was, in March 2015, the royal decree, when the city said, dear colleagues from the platforms, please can you cut off, you know, after 90 days, and then they gave finally the data. So what we see, and I think what is also interesting to point out, is that the recent studies shows that it's business. When you look, for example, at the last Digit Justice study from June the 12th, it is said that 50%, more than 50% of the revenue is made by 10% of peers. And secondly, then 2/3 are renting the property more than 120 days. So we are definitely in business, and that's why we have been calling for 2 years, and in the most reasonable manner, but it has to be effective and performant for a level playing field. Why? If you look in July 2016 at an Allianz study, the study showed that it's all about price. I went to Airbnb in Napoli last November, and I had a fantastic nearly 2 rooms apartment for 59 euros. Of course, the price of the hotel was a bit different. But if you consider that you don't have to comply with fiscal taxes, with you know, regulations, if you are not, enforced, or if you're not registered, then you know, you don't have any risk. So that's where the fair competition is the problem. Because of course, on one hand, you have a regulated sector that I doesn't like to call traditional, because of course, innovation must be at the core of the hotel industry. And we see now much more innovation in the hotel industry, modularity, all kind of new hotels, the Mama Shelter. I'm not going to make advertising for Accor, but with socializing parts in the hotel. But it's all about the question of leveling the playing field. I would like to say also something very important. The question of the liability and the responsibility of the platform is essential. Manolis was reminding the Eurobarometer from June 2016, which pointed out as a main problem that 41% of the respondents didn't know to who to turn to when there is a problem. Of course, when there is an hotel, you know to who to turn to. The last DigiJust study point out that 60% of the people to know exactly who to turn to. And that's the same problems with, when case of dispute with Booking.com, for which we are asking for a contact person in the country, and of course, the name of the authority to contact, because otherwise small, I would say, businesses, you all know that small, 91% of the hotels employ less than 10 employees. So we are in micro-enterprises, which needs also not to be protected, but needs to have a fair level playing field. I would like to conclude also on this question of thresholds. Yes, we need cooperation. How do you want to cut up the system if the main platforms owners do not agree? And I remember one of the excellent workshops from the European Commission, I think that was the one in May, Renata was there, and everyone said, but when we get to 60 or to 90, how do we do? And then the young guy from the UK said, we are working at the moment with all the platforms around the table to make sure that there is a link, because of course, if your 60 days are over on Airbnb, you go to Expedia when it's over to Expedia. So I think things need to be structured, keeping the spirit of it, but you know, for the benefits of all stakeholders alike. And I do not speak about one of the biggest problems is, of course, the development of the grey economy or the black economy, because there is around the accommodation sector all the development, you know, of nurse, you know, online, then you have catering online, then you have cleaning online, without any protection for the employees, but also without any clarity, transparency on the work. My last word, and maybe we would conclude later, but important, when my colleague Carlo speaks about the value of property, I cannot agree with that, because I think that the rising cost of housing is terrible. I remember the last European Tourism Forum from last year. I was on stage with a colleague from, there was a colleague from Airbnb, Expedia, but there was a representative of the city of Praha. And it was so interesting and of course surprising to hear that she was saying that the main problem is that all the inhabitants from Praha, not all, but a lot, were going to live outside the city to rent their apartment, to make the money. So it was creating big problems in the morning to come to go to work, and of course to make a kind of ghost city because all apartments were rented. And I want, before giving the floor to Carlo, something extremely important on which we should work on is the receipts. It is not clear yet, but there are studies to come, and also from the Commission, which shows that the receipts coming from in the accommodation sector from the sharing economy is not at all equivalent from what is considered to be not hotels only, the shops, etc., the traditional sector. It's a different segment for part of it. It may change, but that's also a real question, which shows that when things will be made properly structured, but in an open way to facilitate the development of this so-called collaborative economy, then it will really benefit to all stakeholders alike, including the residents first.
Mm-hmm. Well, before giving floor to every one of us to conclude, because food is getting ready, and I know that a lot of people are really looking forward to it. Do we have any questions or remarks from the audience regarding this very complicated question? Yes, Mr. Jamnik.
Gregor Jamnik, Slovenian Hoteliers Association. I think countries and cities are guilty for what we have now, because we were too passive, too stubborn, we didn't understand it, but now we do understand it and we're still not changing our legislations. For example, in Slovenia, tax authority of Slovenia, they said, yeah, just give us data and we'll tax them all. And according to Slovenian law, every platform that is actually offering some services or anything that has a price tag on has to be taxed. And if that platform is not actually sending data to the tax authority, then this is illegal. So we should change legislation in that regards.
No, the people should obey legislation, not to change legislation. We have.
Yeah, no, but no. The thing is that in the legislation it says it's illegal, but then there is no consequence. That's the problem. That's
No.
the gap of the
It's a legislation. There are consequences.
It's a hole in legislation.
I don't think so. Okay, we have no hole in legislation. It's just that it's hard to make the check-in, to know who is really doing this. But otherwise, the legislation is okay. And I think that in Slovenia, we are sometimes exaggerating that we are writing new legislation because the people are not obeying the legislation we already have.
Airbnb is not sending for anyone any data to Slovenian tax authority. Tax authority, so this is illegal. They should do it, and they are not doing it. And this is illegal. But then afterwards, there is no action, there is no pressure.
But I think it's what was pointed out now as well. It's not necessary that the platforms would send the data if the data would be available on the platforms. Then we will do the homework. As it's possible to do in, let's say, tourist resorts as Bled again. Yes, of course, you can check in Bled as well, for example. You don't have data also in a hotel, who is in every day in a hotel. But you must do your part of the job, of the business, of the community. You let people know, the authorities know who and when is your guest.
According to Slovenian law, all the platforms that are not sending data are illegal.
Okay, I'm a little bit confused. We have a lawyer here, but we have
It
also
is
Mr.
actually it's
Limpert.
the same in Austria, but to make this very clear, we also changed our local tourism promotion act to make it very, very clear that they have to give us the data or make an agreement. An agreement means that the city of Vienna is also happy with it, and the other side, of course, as well, to find a solution for that problem. And we raise the fines. So it's much more expensive now if you not follow them. What we will do now, right now, is preparing to send the first fines to the platforms, and then we will see what happens. Because they can go to the court, of course, and then we will see what happens. But in the end, to make it very, very clear, all we want from them is to obey the rules. We do not want them to leave Vienna. Yeah? We want them in Vienna. At the moment, it's quite fine. Yeah? All we want is to obey the rules, and I think it's quite fair to want this. And I do not agree that the cities didn't act. There's a lot of cities that acted very, very quickly. I would say Vienna is one of these, but Amsterdam, for example, was much quicker than Vienna was. There's a lot of cities that did a lot. And there was a huge talking between the cities about this topic. So this, I think, is not the problem.
Okay. It's very important to implement the law. Sometimes the law also has to be changed. Yes, please. Yeah.
Hello to everyone. I'm Uroš Buda from Slovenia Hospitality Homes Institute. We are facing with this problem for years. Also, this small hosts has the problem because this is unfair competition. And I think that the point it is, not in the regularization, the point it is that you don't know actually on these platforms who is standing behind the advertise that renting out its home. And I think that the city like Dunaj or Ljubljana, anyone, it's too small to force the Airbnb and such a big system that they give this information. They don't want to. If they want, they already do it. Because they said, we don't want to do this information and we hide this information because we have a business model. we get the provision. When we make the contact between the host and the guest, we get the provision. So we can't give you this information, we can't put this information on public, because then the host and the guest can do the reservation not across the platform. So, but anyway, some identification number on each advertise will help all of us, because this will become transparent. The legal authority could know who is standing, could make a control. The business model could have its own provision, because the guest with that identification number will not know who is standing behind. And maybe this is the solution. I don't know. What do you mean about it? Thank you.
Okay, it's a very bold proposition. It was also bold to say that Vienna is too small. It's for the first time that I heard that. But Mr. Villarola-Lasson.
Well, to all this about registration, there's a lot of new schemes coming in Portugal. We've seen one. My main point here is to say we should not regulate this to protect the hotels. Sorry, they are doing quite well. They are raising their prices. They are doing a good business, I hope, and I think it's fantastic. So that's not the reason for regulation. And talking about this, and sorry to say, but it sounds like I am some gamer making illegal gaming or a drug dealer or something. And my point is, it's much more fun to rent an apartment. So keep on calling me that, because we have actually something that can go against it with much better contribution to society. Remember how quick this is developing. Remember how this is a city problem, Vienna or Berlin or other cities, and then you have a rural area where it's a great benefit, and the mayor is saying, I need to reuse my accommodation. I have a cultural year of European cultural capital in Aarhus, the second city in Denmark. They use this accommodation to get guests. All the guests in the summer houses at the beach are coming in to visit on a one-day stay. They couldn't stay in the existing things. So please look at it in this positive aspect, and also when you say we should stop the platforms saying that they want to live as local people, that is propaganda. Hey, it's not something we say, it's the researchers asking people, why did you choose this? And they say, when I live in the apartment, I live, even if it's a serviced apartment, a 100% serviced apartment, I have my own kitchen, I go to the local store and the local boutique, so I live like a second home resident. There's a lot of possibilities. Slovenia should take the chance to say we protect our citizens, because then you can make a deal with your house owners, with the people of Slovenia, who is the actually providers of this service. And they are willing to pay the taxes, as in Vienna. But when you sound like you are in war against this, and you put a lot of meta questions on the table. You say something about taxation of platforms, and then you do it to a question about short-term rental. Or you have a housing issue in Vienna. Come on, 8,000 apartments, where people mainly live there. Let me just close my point. Because people renting out, they move upstairs, and then they rent out the spare room, or they take on vacation themselves. The majority does, also in Vienna. They do. We know those figures. So 8,000 apartments does not make the housing problem in Vienna. No, they don't.
I totally agree.
8,000
apartments, that's what I said before. As long as it's 8,000, it's no problem. I totally agree.
But don't threaten me saying, but if it goes up.
Yeah, but if it goes up to a number of 30, 40,000, then it might be a problem.
That's the witch hunt. That's when you say,
No. This might be a problem for a city. That's what I said. I totally said it's not a problem in Vienna at the moment. And we have one good thing. We have one good thing in Vienna, which is the social housing. It's not allowed to rent out social housing, and 60% of our flats is social housing. Yeah, so that's protect us. But look to other cities, they have the problem right now, and you have to look in forefront to make clear that tourism is one part of a city, and the city is not a museum. That's the point. Second point you mentioned, I totally agree that regulation is not about protecting the hotels. It's about a level playing field. That's what I said all the time. It's about paying your tax and things like this. And the third point, it's not true that most of them just renting out one room. It's not true. You can see it in the data. Most of them are renting out the whole flat, and it's
Yes.
not only for the 2 weeks they are off by themselves. But that's also not my problem. To find the professionals at the platform is very easy. Our problem is not the professionals. It's very easy to find them. Our problem is also not the student who rents out the platform for 2 days and doesn't pay 22-cent city checks. Yeah? Our problem is the in-between. Yeah? The persons who have 1 flat, 2 flats, 3 flats, renting them out the whole year, not paying tax and things like this. That's a problem to find them. And my plea is, dear platforms, come to the cities, agree, give them the data, let's find a way to enforce the laws. It's not about new regulations. It is about enforcement of existing regulations.
And I propose a meeting. We will come to Vienna and meet with you.
And we could make
But
this-
we're not invited, but now we are.
We
Thank
could-
you.
we
Sure.
And please, you can choose Slovenia as a place of this peace talk.
Thank you.
Okay. Plus, you have to bear in mind, Mr. Villarolas, and witch hunt is not a Slovenian national sport, it's rowing also. But Mr. De Barin, your closing word, because now we have Ms. Roche here, and we don't need to, we don't have to be impolite and that the best female chef in the world should wait too long. So.
Absolutely, and I would like to say that I really appreciated yesterday the gala dinner and the speech, but it was absolutely wonderful.
The lunch will be even better, but okay.
Well,
If it doesn't get cold.
yes, I would like to give some concluding remarks very shortly, and my colleagues know that I'm always very factual and not speaking about whether it's sharing or not. So I think the reality, all studies shows, and that's why there is so much complexity. It's all about business, and the recent studies shows that it is about business, although, fortunately, there are certainly a bit of sharing, people looking for, you know, a family to stay with. The possibility to display on the platforms, whether you are a peer or a professional, whether you are a business or not, will help and definitely clarify all those aspects. I want to conclude also on this point, which is extremely important, of fair competition. Of course, the platform tourism services, I said our good colleagues from UNWTO, provide additional rooms in terms of when there are peaks for demands, which is certainly excellent and will be good for the international role. But what we have seen and studied, at least in Barcelona, but in other cities too, is that the rate occupancy of hotels has started to decrease. And the Boston University made different studies on it, and we see that, of course, there is, of course, consequences on the benefit and of the hotels because of this unlevel playing field. I would conclude to say that we need for Europe to develop sustainable tourism. We need to invest in our sector, in particular in restaurants, in hotels, in cafes, in similar establishments, in all the value chain, in innovation. We won't be able to invest if we are not competitive and if there is not a level playing field at all levels with these platforms, tourism services.
Thank you very much, Mr. De Barin. We also heard already our State Secretary, who was, let's say, presenting the Slovenian part and also how Slovenia acts. It was quite interesting today because the gentlemen were more, let's say, on the fighting scene, and we didn't hear a lot of, let's say, sensible women's talk, but I would like to conclude with Mrs. Hoynik and Mrs. Wagner. So, but we also heard that, okay, there is law and law must be respected, but the law can also be developed. So what can we expect, let's say, on the national level regarding the adaptation of law to new challenges such as sharing economy?
I think it's not so much about this development of legislation, but actually about enforcement.
Mm-hmm.
We say, or Vienna says, if we are waiting for Airbnb to send us the data. If they are not, we are suing. But then we have to ask, where are you planning to sue? Maybe in San Francisco. So Vienna is coming to San Francisco, or in Dublin, yeah. Okay, then if Dublin is an option, then it's much better, because then we have European regulation. If you have to go to the US, an American judge will say, well, we are not applying Austrian law. So this is a problem of enforcement. But in general as well, when I said before about digital economy, if we have sharing cars and so on, now if you're not paying your bills, authorities can collect your car and sell it at the auction. If you're just using this membership options of using car sharing models, nobody can take your car. So this is another challenge for regulators, how to approach in this new access-based consumption economy, this challenge. And what I would like to point out at the end is that perhaps we should start thinking that maybe we cannot make everybody happy. Because we have owners, we have tourists, we have police, hotels, and so on. In case law across in US and in Europe, we can see disputes between owners and tenants. When you have tenants renting out their rooms on Airbnb, and owners not liking that, and perhaps you can get from Airbnb a list of owners or the apartments, but maybe it wasn't the owner who was renting out, but his tenant. And maybe some students who are going home over the weekend and putting their room and perhaps getting more than the rent, more in return.
You're a lawyer, making our lives even more complicated than they are.
Just being realistic, perhaps we can't make everybody happy.
Well, actually we can, by offering you a fantastic lunch in a very short time frame, but we would like to conclude with Mrs. Wagner, because you're representing, in a way, Asia, and Asia is the future and, you know, the most populated continent, so you will take everything in some years, so it's perhaps obsolete what we actually have spoken here, or not.
Okay, we have no intention in Asia of taking everything, but I would say that actually what Christian started off with is it's about dialogue and cooperation and about finding a middle road. I think this is a great forum with the fact that you've actually discussed this openly between the public and the private sector. I think there should be other discussions like this around the world. And one of the things that we've learned in this industry is learning from other people's mistakes and successes and sharing best practices is definitely the best way forward. And on that note, I would say that's how we should continue this dialogue. There is probably no right and no wrong. And now I'm really looking forward to a wonderful lunch.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much to all the panelists. So we really appreciate your openness. And you really, really qualified for this very fine lunch we have been announcing now for 2 hours. So thank you very much. And now we will just make a very brief presentation of our guest of honor, she was here yesterday or yesterday evening, but she's also here tonight, Mrs. Anna Roche, the best female chef officially in the world. And your friend from Netflix and all the big networks in the world which are also presenting what she does. So please, Anna, welcome. It's a great pleasure. You're actually quite used now to the limelight, but could you tell us something about what you will cook for us today?
So first, what should I do? Can you hear me? Yeah. So first of all, thank you so much for the invitation. It's very nice to be in Bled. It is around the corner, but not really. I mean, we still need around 2 hours from Kobarid, so Slovenia is not that small. Anyway, today we are presenting you what Slovenia really is. It is Mediterranean. It has fish. We cook polenta, we do potatoes, eggs, and we are rich. We have truffles as well. No. So we have olive oil. I think when we speak about Slovenian gastronomy, we sometimes forget to say that from our mountains you can see the sea, and spicing up the meat or the landscape with the fish is totally right in our case. So we sometimes say we are richer than Austria because we have sea as well. And it's really a brief distance, but we don't have Vienna.
Not yet.
Well, you never know. Martin Kerpanen, the story. We all can become Martin Kerpanen and start selling you the salt.
Well, that's the Slovenian national hero, a salt trader who actually didn't pay taxes. But he won a fight in Vienna.
It's a great conclusion, actually. So maybe just a few words of who doesn't know anything about Slovenian food. I sometimes say we are such a huge melting pot. Imagine it's such a small country. You can cross it in 2 hours from west to east and 3 hours from north to south. And then you need another 3 hours to go from west to east.
And then 2 hours to go to Kobarit.
Right. You know, Kobarid is the only place in Slovenia that doesn't have, is not connected with highways.
Yeah.
And this is why we remain so unique.
Yeah.
Yeah, a little bit secret Slovenians. Anyway, but we are surrounded by huge cultural identities. We have Italy on the west, and then Austria on the north with German culture, and then Hungary and Croatia with Balkans on the south. And you know, people have always been moving around the borders. This is how our food is so influenced by all those big identities. So you can actually have a great Alpine lunch and then an hour driving later, a great Mediterranean dinner. So I think our job, so the job of who is cooking, cooks, chefs, is to tell this story. We are trying to do it. So
thank you very much, Anna. We're really looking forward to your show cooking. So we will see you while preparing your part of lunch, but there are also other variations of the lunch which is prepared by Grand Hotel Toplice. So Anna is really special, but you have also other things to enjoy here. So thank you very much, and as we say in Slovenian, dober tek, which means have a good run. So because you will run around the lake, you will have the peace talks in Slovenia, perhaps.
Rent out the castle.
Yeah, that's a good solution. You cannot rent the island because it's owned by the Catholic Church. So thank you very much to all panelists. Enjoy your afternoon here at Bled, and especially enjoy the lunch. Thank you and goodbye next year.